Before we start the review today, everybody, first of all, I want to thank every one of you who has subscribed and has been able to get me to 100 subscribers. I know this review is a little bit late. It's just life happens. Just haven't had a lot of time to be able to record this review, but I did just want to go ahead and say before starting this, thank you all so much for getting me to 100 subscribers. It really does mean a lot to me. It might not seem like a big goal, but for somebody just starting out, it's a big goal to me. So, without wasting any more time, for the 100 subscriber special review, I give you... So how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another review. It's just going to be me this time because Jonah and Logan, unfortunately, we're going to be too busy to have enough time to watch the show, so it is just going to be me. But today I'm going to be talking about Iron Man Armored Adventures. So this is going to be kind of a little bit different from how I've done some of my other reviews because, as you guys know, I've mostly only been doing movie reviews, and reviewing a show is a lot more different because you can't exactly go in depth with every single episode. So this will probably just be different sections of the show, just to kind of try and sum up how I feel about the entire show as a whole. So one thing I do want to start off with is the animation style. I will admit, the animation in the first couple episodes are a little bit rough to get through, but once you get past the first, 4 or 5 episodes or so, you can tell the animation does start to improve because they're starting to get in the hang of what they're doing, what kind of direction they want to go with. And then when you start getting towards much later in the show, you can definitely tell that they have perfected how they want to do this animation. And it's also just a really nice show to look at because it has a nice comic book, cel-shaded style. It's really nice 3D animation. And on the whole, I do think it looks really good. And it makes me enjoy watching the show because of how vibrant it is. So the next thing I do want to talk about is the characters. One thing that this show is easily most well remembered for is the fact that it puts a really big twist on the Iron Man mythos, because it makes all the characters teenagers. Now, when you guys think of Iron Man, there is a 99% chance your first thought is Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, the genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. But this show isn't that Tony. The show starts and he's a 16-year-old kid, and over the course of the 2 seasons, the final episode takes place on his 18th birthday. So it is a really big change, especially for a character like this. But honestly, I thought it worked. Because one thing I really loved about them being teenagers was the fact that you really got to see them really grow as characters a little bit more than you would if you saw them as they were adults. Because you look at Tony Stark, and at the very beginning of the show, and even all throughout, he's a very emotional kid. He tends to let his emotions get the best of him on several occasions. But at the end of the day, he always ends up doing the right thing. And one of my favorite parts about his character development is in the first Living Laser episode, where he has to face the fact that he has to learn to balance the life of being Tony Stark and Iron Man. Otherwise, he will end up losing Stark International. Just in that episode alone, that's one of my favorite episodes for Tony, just because you look at him in the first several episodes and he's constantly just skipping school and just blowing everybody off. But then this episode, you really start seeing him take school a lot more seriously, and you really start to see him grow a lot more of a bond with his friends in school. One thing that I also think is really interesting about the show is the dynamic that Tony has with Gene Khan. Now, these two characters do first meet in episode 2 as Iron Man and the Mandarin. But in episode 3, they meet as Tony Stark and Gene Khan, and you really see them, just from this episode alone, start to become friends. And that really makes it all the more heartbreaking when you see their dynamic and their friendship grow throughout all of season 1. And then in the final episode of season 1, they learn who each other are. Gene says that was what caused Tony's dad's plane crash, and that he's taken his father hostage. And you really see that, at that moment, their friendship kind of just was over in an instant. And you really start to see the anger Tony has for Gene in season 2 when they occasionally run into each other. On the whole, I really do like all the characters in this show. I think Tony is really well developed. Rhodey is probably my favorite, just because he's not afraid to call people out on their crap. Pepper is a bit of a pill to swallow, especially in a good chunk of season 1. But as the show keeps going along, she starts to become a lot more likable. And even in some cases, even in season 1, she is a really great means of comic relief. Some of the other side characters are also just kind of alright, because they're there at some moments and then they aren't there in other times. But on the whole, I still did really enjoy most of the characters in this show. I do kind of wish some of the other background characters did get a little bit more. But considering the fact that the main characters got as much as they did, I'm honestly okay with it. Because Tony, Rhodey, and Pepper got the most, and they were the most important. One other thing I want to talk about is the villains. The villains throughout this show, I honestly loved just about all of them, especially a lot of their designs. Really, the only designs I wasn't the most fond of were Ironmonger and Crimson Dynamo. I like Crimson Dynamo the second time he showed up because he actually had more of a crimson look as opposed to just a plain white suit. But even on the whole, something about their designs I just really wasn't a huge fan of. But all the other designs I really, really, really loved. Especially the Mandarin. The Mandarin was probably my favorite villain design in the show. But in terms of the villains as characters, some of the standouts for me were Mandarin because of the fact that he's the overarching main villain of the entire show. One of the big plot points of the show is for season 1 is getting all 5 Mako 1 rings. And then season 1 ends with, oh, there are 5 more out there. And then the Mako 1 rings is definitely put on the back burner of season 2. But they still make it a big point at the end of the show about getting the 10th ring. And then the final episode is of alien invasion. But I think some other standout villains for me, I absolutely loved Ghost, because he was the kind of villain they never really beat Ghost. He was usually the kind of villain where, like, if he had a goal, he either completed it or he found a better alternative. They never really beat Ghost, and I think that's what makes him one of my favorite villains in the show. There were 2 other standout villains for me, and one of them was the Living Laser. I kind of wish he showed up a little bit more, because I really did like his journey of going from a nobody to having such hatred for Tony Stark, or really having so much hatred for Iron Man. And then Tony Stark reaching out to help him really gave him that feeling of, wow, there's somebody who doesn't think I'm useless. And then he figures out Tony is Iron Man when MODOK is essentially reading his mind. And then he doesn't believe it at first, and then goes, he was trying to help me. And then he gives his life to save him. So when he comes back in season 2, it's such a great interaction there as well. And he's definitely a standout for me. Arthur Parks is just such a really well-developed villain for the 4 episodes that he's there. And I'm a little upset he didn't show up a little bit more, because he only showed up that 1 episode in season 2. The other standout for me was easily Whiplash. Wow, this guy was intimidating. He shows up a little bit more often than some of the other villains, because he does only show up a total of twice in season 1. But he still feels enough like a threat, because the first time he's going after Pepper. The second time, he's what causes the Iron Man armor to get a bug in it, where the armor gains sentience. That was freaky. And then at the beginning of season 2, he establishes just how much more of a threat he is, because he nearly kills Iron Man. He destroys the Mark 1 armor, and even with Tony getting the Mark 2, was still a challenge for him. And on the whole, he also just had a really great design, and I think he's definitely one of my favorites in the show. So there are 2 more things I really want to talk about that really stood out to the show for me. One thing is the world building. Wow, like, rewatching the show before doing this review, I forgot how well this show does the world building, with how many Marvel characters they reference, whether it be they reference characters like Punisher or Moon Knight or even Spider-Man, to even straight up showing characters and having character-focused episodes on people like Black Panther, Hulk, Hawkeye, and Black Widow. Another character they mentioned being Thor, and then even though you don't properly see him, but you see his shield, with Captain America. This show really did a great job of still making it feel like an Iron Man show, but still setting up so many other characters in the universe to really make it feel like it is a Marvel universe, but not pushing it to the forefront, and still keeping it as an Iron Man show. And in the final episode, with it essentially being this universe's first formation of the Avengers, they don't call it the Avengers, but with the heroes that are there, I'm calling it the Avengers. So one final thing I do want to talk about, and it's because of the fact that every other movie that I've done a review for that has Iron Man in it are the suits. I'm only going to talk about the suits for the heroes, because I kind of summed up my thoughts on some of the villain suits in the villain section. But first, I do want to talk about Rescue, Pepper's armor. My biggest problem with this suit is the fact that it got introduced a little too late, because this armor was introduced in the 3rd to last episode, which meant that it only had 3 episodes to really get any time to shine. Which is a real shame, because I did really like how this armor looks. As far as I'm aware, this is the origin of the purple Rescue armor, because other times in the comics, it's usually kind of like a Silver Centurion type color scheme where it's red and silver. But I do really like the decision to make this armor purple, because I do think it kind of fits a little bit better than red does, and helps kind of distinguish the Rescue armor from Iron Man, kind of like how the color scheme of War Machine makes it more unique compared to Iron Man. Speaking of War Machine, the War Machine armor is also a really great suit, because Rhodey gets it in the final 2 episodes of season 1, and even from the design, it is such a tank. Just like any other War Machine armor, it is known for its insane arsenal. It is an absolute powerhouse, and one of my favorite parts of season 2 was getting to see Iron Man and War Machine interact on the field. That was something I did enjoy about season 1, is the fact that it was just kind of Tony out there on the field on his own. But going into season 2 and seeing more of that Iron Man and War Machine dynamic is always something that I love seeing, which is one of my favorite parts about Iron Man 2, was seeing Iron Man and War Machine fight together. Now that we've gotten those 2 suits out of the way, let's go on to Iron Man, because he has 7 armors in the show all throughout. So we'll go chronologically. So we'll start with the Mark 1. This is a very simple suit because it only has thrusters, repulsors, and a unibeam. And that's it. Now, when a lot of people think the Mark 1, they usually think of the armor that Tony Stark uses to escape the cave. But nope, the Mark 1 for this Tony is essentially just this very standard Iron Man suit. And this armor is the basis for all of the other suits to come. And I think on the whole, it is a really cool design. It's, once again, very simple, but I do think it works, because as a Mark 1 suit, you can't exactly expect it to be balls to the wall bonkers on having an insane design and very intricate design, so I think it works. The armor he gets after that is the Silver Centurion. This armor, I'm so mad that it only got used once. It was used in the first Whiplash episode, which is episode 5 of season 1. It's used for maybe like a minute at most, and then it's never used again. It's seen a couple of times throughout the show, but that's about it. And that really irritates me, because this is one of my favorite suits, not just in Iron Man mythos, but in this show, because I always like it when suits kind of tend to switch up the color scheme a bit, where it goes from like red and gold to red and silver, or in this show's case, it makes it seem like red and yellow to red and white. I always tend to like it when Iron Man suits kind of change up the norm a little bit. Still, on the whole, I do really like this suit. I wish we could have got to see it used at least one more time, but I'm happy it got used at all. Now, the armor he gets after this is actually the Hulkbuster suit, but the interesting thing about this armor is the fact that when he first uses it, it's not against Hulk. And I think it was originally called the Dynamo Buster, because he first used this to fight Crimson Dynamo. And then he used it to fight Hulk towards the end of season 1, and then after that was when it got the name the Hulkbuster. But like what I said about War Machine, this armor is also a big powerhouse, because it has the biggest arsenal of any of his armors, probably up to the Mark II, and overall just has a really cool design. Not as cool as the design in the MCU with Age of Ultron, but I would still say it's up there. Now, the next suit that comes after this is the Stealth Armor. This is probably the most prevalent armor in the entire show, aside from the Mark II. It's used maybe once or twice in season 1, and it is used a lot in season 2. Like in season 2, if Tony isn't using the Mark II, he's using the Stealth Armor, which I'm okay with, because this is probably my second favorite suit in the entire show. I just really like the shades of blue that are used, and it helps because of it being a lot more prevalent in season 2. It helped the suit really grow on me a lot. Now, the suit that's introduced right after the Stealth Armor is the Space Armor. Unfortunately, this suit was also used only properly once. It was used once in season 2 for maybe like 20 seconds that we see in the Doctor Doom episode, the second one. But it does have one entire episode where he is pretty much in this the entire time, which is the second Living Laser episode. This suit doesn't really get a whole lot of changes. It changes the red to black. It has some minor design changes, and it takes away the little mouthpiece on the faceplate to where it just has the eyes. And I do think it looks good. Just once again, like some other suits in the show, I wish we could have gotten to see it used a little bit more. The final suit he uses in season 1 is the Arctic Armor. This suit also got the Silver Centurion treatment, where it was only used once in the entire show. At least for the Silver Centurion, we at least got to see it a couple more times in the armory. Arctic Armor, it's really only used in the third to last episode of season 1, and then I don't even think we ever see it again. Which is a little bit of a shame, because I do like the white and yellow combination, and the fact that it does give him a couple more weapons than some of his other suits do. Again, on the whole, like every other suit in the show, I do think it looks pretty good, but for all the suits that Iron Man does use in the show, this is probably my least favorite. But oh boy, the Mark II armor. This is definitely my favorite armor in the entire show. I just think it has the best design. It has a lot more of an arsenal of weapons compared to his other suits, from shoulder rockets to flamethrowers to the sonic disruptors from the Arctic Armor, and to being able to use the Unibeam a lot more. This armor really made it feel like he was able to use the Unibeam a little bit more than other suits, because a big point that he kept bringing up whenever he used the Mark I was anytime he used the Unibeam, it was always a big drain of power, which was still always the case, and for good reason. The Unibeam is an insane weapon that does use a lot of power. But it felt like in the Mark II, he didn't have to run into this problem much, but I was okay with it. This is definitely my favorite suit in the entire show, and this is probably one of my favorite Iron Man suits of all time. Before we actually get to the final rating, I did want to take a little bit of time to talk about the story, since I've already recorded and edited most of the review by now, and I realized I didn't talk about the story as much as I really should have. Overall, I think the show actually does have a really good story, because from start to finish, you definitely start to see that the story definitely does change, but it changes in a way that makes sense. Because the story starts, and Tony's just a 16-year-old kid, his father is presumably killed in a plane crash, he ends up having to get the heart monitor, he uses the Iron Man armor to try and spy on Obadiah Stane, who he believes is the cause of his father's plane crash, and then ends up learning after stopping a train from crashing into Stark Tower and in the middle of the city that he can use the Iron Man armor to do a lot more good than just for his own selfish needs. And throughout the entire show is you basically seeing him encounter a whole bunch of new villains, making tons of new friends, and then a major plot that ends up changing towards the start of season 1 is really the race to get all 5 Makoan rings. And then season 2, it ends up being much more about including Justin Hammer into the story, and then getting the 10 Makoan rings starts off as a background thing and then it's put to the forefront. But on the whole, I do think this show from start to finish has a really great story. I think every single episode is so much fun to watch. And if I did have to pick a favorite episode from the show, I'm probably going to have to go with the Extremis episode. They were really faithful to the Extremis comic, which is probably my favorite Iron Man comic storyline ever. They adapted that story so incredibly well, and it's definitely my favorite episode of both seasons of the show. But on the whole, this was the show that got me into Marvel. It's always going to hold that special place in my heart for the fact that if it weren't for this show, I probably would not be as big of a Marvel fan as I am today. Now, it does mean that there is going to be a lot of bias in my rating, and there has been some bias with some of the thoughts that I've had throughout this review, but it's also my review, so if you got a problem with it, sorry. But yeah, I do genuinely really love this show, and one big reason that I have for it is because of the fact that, especially on rewatch, I relate to this Tony Stark so much. This Tony Stark really shaped who I am today. My major in college that I'm working towards is design engineering, which has always been an interest I've had since watching this show, and I do feel like I relate to him the most because with the fact that he does let his emotions get the best of him on more than one occasion. I'm guilty of this as well, but even with that, watching this entire show when I was growing up, it's just such a special memory for me, and even rewatching it, I just wanted to keep watching, and when I finished it, I honestly wanted to watch it again. And on the whole, I will not give it a 10 because there are some things that I genuinely think could have been done better, but I'm still going to give it a 9 out of 10. And that's a lot of bias, but I quite frankly really don't care because I love this show, and I'm going to stick with that. And that is going to do it for my review of Iron Man Armored Adventures. Please feel free to let me know what you guys thought of the show down below if you have watched it. Stay tuned for the next review, which will most likely end up being Black Adam. We shall see. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you all for 100 subscribers, and I'll see you guys next time. See y'all later, webheads. Oh, and before I forget, this show has one of the best theme songs I have ever heard. And it's probably my favorite theme song of any TV show ever. Fight me.
Yeah, I've got boot jets, and you don't.